For me, I knew all those things added together told me you'd have to do something different now. For me, I feel better, first of all. I'm not under that kind of stress anymore. And everybody around me knows that I'm happier and it's easier to do things, plan things out, because I set my schedule and I can say, if I had to leave the classroom, I had to come up with sub-plans. And at my school, that meant pages and pages of things typed up. You can't just take a day off. And if you took too many of the days they gave you, they wanted to know why. And so all of that just adds up to it's time to do something else.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Traveling Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Panopoulos. This podcast is about teachers who left the classroom but not education as a whole. We have a very special guest today. Michelle Flora is a former kindergarten through second grade teacher who taught at the same district for 32 years. In the early 2010s, Michelle realized it was time to explore other options and began looking into what was available outside the classroom. In the spring of 2019, Michelle learned about a nonprofit in the state of Indiana that specialized in blind and low vision babies. Having completed the training to enter into this full-time in 2020 meant Michelle's passion was able to shine in a different way. By October 2021, Michelle moved closer to her daughter in Indianapolis while building a full-time caseload with this nonprofit organization. Outside of education, Michelle is a mom, a Mimi, and loves to read and garden in her spare time. Michelle, thank you so much for being a guest on the Traveling Teacher Podcast.
Thank you, Peter. I'm looking forward to sharing.
Wonderful. Yes. The first initial conversation we had, I really enjoy these conversations with everybody, and especially you, because you really kind of shined a light on something that I was unaware of in terms of an option for teachers who are looking to potentially leave the classroom, right? And the work that you're doing right now is something that we will get into in the future. But I'd really kind of want to start from the beginning here. When did you know you wanted to become a teacher, Michelle?
Well, oddly enough, I started my undergrad thinking I was going to be an accountant. And after spending a little bit of time doing that, they kept saying, oh, you don't have to declare your major. You don't have to declare your major. The first year is all the same. And so after my first semester, I decided, sitting in an office all the time behind a desk isn't really what I want to do. I started babysitting full-time when I was 11. I babysat full-time for a 9-month-old at that point. And I thought, I really like working with kids, seeing them learn. I think I'm going to switch my major to education. Of course, when I went in to do that, they said, oh, well, education and nursing are the only two that you can't transfer everything to, and they start in like a cohort right away. So that means you're going to have to go to school for an extra semester. But I did, because I just didn't feel that sitting in an office all day, every day was what I was meant to do or what I felt I wanted to do.
I hear you there. And that initial, you babysitting full time from a very young age and having that kind of realization like, wow, I really enjoy working with kids. And honestly, taking that leap into a different major, especially when it means you have to do an extra semester, is something that, maybe a lot of people wouldn't have done. They would have said, I'm already here. I don't want to do an extra semester, so I'm just gonna stick this out. But it's definitely a good thing that you ended up doing so. And so, yeah, I mean, what grades did you teach during that time? And if I remember correctly, you were in the same district, as I mentioned, for that entire time.
I actually had to transfer from my university to a local branch of it because I was paying everything myself. And by the time it came to student teaching, I didn't have any more money. And I knew I had to be able to get there and have gas money. So I transferred to a local one and did my student teaching in a school that was about a half hour from my home. And luckily they were growing rapidly, building a new school. They had chosen several teachers from the school I was doing my student teaching at to move and open this new school. So there were a lot of positions. So I was very fortunate, and I stepped into a position right away where they already knew me. By the fact that I had to go an extra semester meant I just graduated in December. And luckily, it worked out that I picked up a long-term sub position for the rest of that school year. That was actually a great thing because then the administrator and the other teachers really got to know me. I wasn't being supervised by someone all the time in my student teaching, and I got to handle a really difficult classroom and prove I could do it. And so getting in for the next year really just worked out after that. I spent my whole career in the same school district. Probably about 17 or 18 years in, they closed the school I was in, and I was in a primary school, which is a very unique setting. So I only had kindergarten, first and second in that building. We had like 7 of every grade level. We were a big school, but only 3 grades. It's very unique to do that because all of your programming can meet your kids at that age. And then when they decided to close that school, they weren't going to have any primary and secondary anymore. They were going to do full elementary. So at that time, I was working part-time. I had 2 children and was given the opportunity to do what they called a job share. So I had a half-day kindergarten and someone else had a half-day kindergarten to make the full position. But at the new school, they weren't going to have any more job shares. So that was another big leap. So do I go to another school where I don't know anyone, don't have any relationships, or do I stick with the people I've been working with for several years, continue to build that relationship, and go back to work full-time? So that's what I did. I went back full-time. I was working part-time, and then in the afternoons I would help my husband. We farmed, and I would go home and work on the farm too, but it just worked out. So I finished my career then at that school once we moved, and I moved from second grade, where I started at that building, to kindergarten in the last few years before I left. And again, I had taught kindergarten previously and knew that I had a passion for them and really wanted to be in that grade. So there's something about getting the ones that come in and don't know anything about school to help them build their school career that I really enjoyed.
I really love that. I mean, I mention it all the time in previous podcasts as well. Elementary, I tried for a couple of days and I joke it was just too many boogers and tears for me. But, it takes a special kind of person to do the kindergarten especially. And it sounds like it's something that you really gravitated towards, again, even from a young age with babysitting that 9-month-old. And obviously that's a lot younger, right? But regardless, I mean, for any teachers that are listening, or for anyone who may be interested in going into teaching, what Michelle mentioned at the beginning of that wonderful story about her experiences was that, she had an opportunity for a long-term subbing position. And I started off the same exact way. And I think it's something that really kind of helps you get your feet wet without really diving in head first into something. Because listen, teaching is something that has so many different parts to it. And having a long-term subbing position means that you are given some sort of pre-made structure to a degree that allows you to step into it and say, hey, here's kind of what we're doing now. And you really can focus on one piece of the puzzle, which is the most important piece, which is interacting with the kids in a proper way. And so I really love when teachers mention that they'd start off as a long-term sub like you did, because it helps so much. And I didn't know that it was a possible thing to have that primary school style where it's just kindergarten through second grade. And it sounds like it was a pretty big school, but it sounds pretty interesting. So you found both sides of that.
It was definitely an interesting experience, and I had not been there either. It was also an open classroom, so there were no walls between the classrooms. So a lot of different experiences in that first teaching, student teaching, and then my first job there. But, I found that an open classroom was the quietest school I've ever been in, because the children were very cognizant of the neighbors next door. You could hear them They could hear us, and they were very respectful of that. It was very interesting. You would think it would be a very loud environment, but it is not at all.
I think it takes a special teacher to be able to kind of create that structure as well and kind of show the students like, hey, there's and again, I'm sure they're aware of it as well. But that is something I've actually never heard of before. I didn't know that those open classrooms kind of existed. I mean, tell us about that experience and tell us what these kind of spaces looked like. Obviously, there's no walls, but tell us a little bit about the space.
When you walked in the building, there was a central core hub where the library and the office and all of those things were together, and there was a hallway that went all the way around the school. When you went in, so there was a whole wing where 3 or 4 classrooms could be. It was one huge area open to the hallway too. It was just one big space. We had cabinets we could put between classes. They did not go to the ceiling. We could see over them. We had cabinets we could put in the hallway where the kids could hang their coats and things, but there were gaps. Another beautiful thing that came from that was the teacher next to and we got along very well, had similar teaching styles. We combined our classes and opened it up between the 2 rooms, and we team taught. We did all our planning together. We decided who was working with what groups and what we were going to do. We read to the kids every day, combined classes. It was a wonderful experience. We got to where we could sit down in 40 minutes and plan everything we needed for the next week because we were just in tune with each other. We knew where all of these children were, and the children knew both of us equally. There wasn't any like, oh, Mrs. Flora came over and worked with me today. It was just, we just flowed back and forth. You can't do that in a regular classroom. So there were a lot of experiences there that I really enjoyed. We had an enclosed art room and an enclosed science lab in a primary building, which was also unique, and an enclosed computer area. But all of the classrooms in the building were open. There was one big area that was kindergarten that had walls to the hallway, but when you walked in, there were 3 kindergarten classes in this space. We could see from one end to the other, and another benefit of that is you have more eyes on the kids than you do when it's just one person in the classroom. You also have a lot of support on those really tough days because we all have those in education. And sometimes it just helps to look over the wall and get a smile from the person next door, or to look over the wall and see that person going, oh my goodness. And it's not just you, that the moon is doing something to the kids today. It's something, but you have that support that you don't have in a closed classroom. So I loved that experience. It was very different, something I didn't have in college, so I had to get used to it. But all of the teachers there were very close, and it led to a family type atmosphere in the building, I think.
Unbelievable. I mean, across the board, you mentioned the co-teaching aspect with that other teacher and kind of putting all the kids together. And, when I did the co-teaching, it was more of an inclusion setting where I had a special educator with me as well.
Right.
But it's such an amazing thing because what you're mentioning, right? You have that backup, you have somebody to bounce ideas off of. You're making it more of an act, which we both know teaching has to be at some points to engage the kids. And you're really kind of doing this with somebody, and it just makes everything flow very nicely. And it's just so much fun. I mean, you bringing this up is bringing back a lot of memories to my classroom as well. So I do appreciate it. And again, this open classroom piece is so fascinating to me. I had never heard of it before. And, again, like you said, you have these cabinets, you have these spaces for these things, but you can still look over and kind of see what's going on in the other classes. You can see from side to side and see what's going on with the other teachers. And sometimes the classroom, whether it's open or not, the moon is doing something to the kids and you're just along for the ride and you're hoping for that bell to ring just a couple minutes sooner.
Yes. When you're in your own classroom, sometimes you don't find it till the end of the day and you're walking to the bus and you see it on every teacher's face and you're like, oh, It wasn't just me today, thank goodness. But you don't know that in your own space, thinking, what has happened today? But it happens. There are just days where they feed off of each other, and seriously, the moon plays a role in what happens in classrooms. The smaller the body, the more they feel it, I think, too. So there also was no competition in that building because whatever you're doing over there, we all shared. It was all open. You could see, hey, here's my box I'm going to work out of. Here's a craft, or here's a science project I'm going to do. Would you like to do it with me? Or here's the materials. Would you like to share it? It just led to an overall great experience. So I feel very fortunate that I got to experience that, because I realize that not a lot of teachers, A, know that kind of teaching can exist, or B, get to experience it.
So incredible. Do you feel, when you were kind of splitting up from teaching and doing the farming back when you would go back home, do you feel in some way that the farming kind of influenced the teaching that you would do? Did you do any different kinds of projects or activities, or do you feel as though your lessons were kind of surrounding the farming that you were doing?
I did. I would gather grains that we were harvesting and take them in and just have explore bins for the kids, or sensory bins, we call them now. My husband would go out and dig a hole deep enough that we were in actual clay and bring it in, and we would do a pioneer unit. So we made our own marbles that got hard as can be, put them in the sun to bake. I brought in ears of corn. Kids had never seen it. How do you get it off? It was an exploration station of shucking and hauling the corn off once it was dry, looking at what different seeds were. I used to do a lot of gardening in my classroom, so leftover seeds that I was putting in my garden at home, I brought in, and we would I had big tubs that we would plant rows of different kinds of seeds. We would compare what different kinds of seeds look like, and I would have them try to match up. Here's a picture of the real vegetable. Here are my seeds. Which ones do you think are carrots? And then just books about outdoors and farming and gardening, because that was a part of my life. Sometimes I brought in things that we could taste that I had grown in my garden. We made ice cream one time in class. I made strawberry ice cream. I brought strawberries from my garden, and we mashed them up, and we made strawberry ice cream, and apples. It did influence it, because that's just how my life was. So while I'm doing my daily things, it's like, oh, I could use this in the classroom, or we could do an activity with this. And I shared that with other teachers. So if our whole team wanted to do the pioneers or make our own marbles and experience what that was like, my husband would dig up enough. We'd carry big tubs of clay into school and work on that. And I would go get seeds and help people who didn't know how to garden. Like, let's get this started, because one of the things we needed to cover was the life cycle of a plant. Well, there's not a better way to do that than to actually plant a plant and watch it grow and see what comes of it as it grows. So that did influence me a lot in my teaching.
I think the symbiosis of two of the things in your life that are clearly very important to you really kind of added to a very important and memorable style of teaching and learning for the students. And I'm sure that it's something that really stuck with them, because you mentioned identifying plants and all of that stuff. I'm big into farming as well, and I feel as though a lot of people cannot identify certain types of plants that we eat regularly, hopefully, right? And so for you to do that from such a young age, and the marble thing sounds really cool. All of these things that you implemented, and I think the best lessons come from, passion. And it's clear that you have that passion not only for the teaching, but also for the farming. And, it's really cool when you say, I was I was farming and doing these things and thinking about how I can incorporate these into the classroom, right? So it's just this well-rounded thing that I'm sure any teachers listening can understand and resonate with, because again, that passion is something that is just super important when it comes to educating young students. students in general, educating anybody in general. There needs to be passion there because it allows for the engagement of students and it allows for a memorable experience. And that is really the thing that sticks with people the most. So thank you so much for sharing that. That is super, super amazing.
I know I always got a reaction from the kids. Every year at the beginning of the year, I would send home a bag and give them some suggestions and say, this bag is about you. Bring some things in that will tell us about you and see how many friends you have in the classroom that have the same thing. Well, I always shared mine first. And one of the things in there, I had pictures of kids and seeds and grocery receipts because I like to go shopping. But I also had a picture of one of our tractors. And I'd be like, well, I drive this when I go home. And they'd be like, wow, just some of them had never seen a tractor like that. And it was another way to make a connection. When we moved to the other school, it was a little more rural. So there were kids that were like, yeah, we have one like that. It was just another connection that I made. And they don't think of you outside of the classroom. If they run into you in the grocery store, the littles especially, it's like, what are you doing here? Well, I have to buy groceries too. They really do run into you and think of that. So anything I could do to make a personal connection with them, like I'm a person and I have kids. I'm a mommy. So I always talk to them like, sometimes if your kids are sick, you have to take a phone call during the day. That just happens. And I just always explained it to my class. If you're sick and I have to call your mommy, do you want her to be able to answer the phone? Yeah. So if I said, hey, my girls aren't feeling good today, I might get a phone call. They were quiet as a mouse if that phone rang because they knew, hey, if they call my mom, I want her to answer and I can, we can find out if I need to go home. But I always tried to have that personal connection with the class and with the students when I was teaching.
That piece, when you started talking about this, I totally agree with the fact that students, even in the middle school, they are blown away when they see you outside of the classroom. I always used to joke like, no, I never leave this classroom. I live here, I eat here, I sleep here, because, that's kind of your thought as a younger student. And it's just so funny to hear that from somebody else. And yes, when you see them in public, their jaws kind of drop a little bit and they're like, what is happening right now? And yeah, so no, that is it. And that piece of being a human being with them, even from such a young age as kindergarten, is so important. I think it's something that a lot of adults who do not teach, I have observed, to no judgment of anybody, but I've observed that, they treat them as their little children and you got to do a certain thing and this and that. But I think when you are human with them and you are sharing experiences like your daughter's being sick and you may need to answer the phone and stuff like that, those are such crucial moments in any child's life because they're getting an experience of something and being explained as to, well, how would this be in your scenario? And they're really kind of seeing it for what it is in real life. So I think that's such a beautiful thing for sure.
We had a counselor that always told us, you need to share how you're feeling with your kids. Something had happened and several of us were very sad. It was a tragedy and you weren't able to wipe all that away before the kids came in. And so while I never went into details about things that were bad, but if I was having a bad day, I often told them, I woke up this morning and something happened that made me sad. And so that might be why I look a little different today, but we're going to go on and have a good day. But letting them see that I have bad days too. If my car broke down, I would tell them when I got to school, you will not believe what happened to me today because I'm a person just like they are. And they're like, hey, that's happened to me before. Like, it can't happen to you because you're a teacher. But I just think that personal relationship with them is very important. I would sit outside my classroom. I sat because I was teaching kindergarten and they're little. And I greeted them every day. They had to line up and wait on me. I did not let them go in the classroom without a greeting. And I said, do you want a hug or a handshake today? I made a personal contact with them each day. And of course, if someone didn't want anything, I respected that. But I would try to ask them a question like, oh, how's your brother today? Or if they'd had a problem yesterday, I tried to remember and make that personal contact with them. And it got through the year. Some of them started only with a handshake. But by the end of the year, I was getting 20 hugs on the way in, or 25, depending on what you had in your class. But I always wanted them to know that I cared about them, and let's start the day off right. If they came in tears because they fought with their brother in the car, I'd keep them out and we'd have a little discussion about it. Like, how can we turn this around? How can your day get better? You need some way to get moving out of that. And they don't have the emotional control to do that sometimes. So, and I think big kids need it too.
Yeah, for sure. They don't have the emotional control, but they also don't have the emotional understanding if you were not to preface your day with like, listen, I may seem a little different today. This is not on you. This is something that happened to me prior to you coming in here. And I think without that validation and understanding of something like that, they may feel as though whatever is going on internally for you is something that they caused, right? And so again,
Yeah,
it's so heartwarming, all of this that you're saying, and really kind of taking that time to kind of break things apart, because as I mentioned in pretty much every podcast at this point, is that you and I both know, and every teacher listening knows, that, you know, the majority of our career is more so of a social, emotional learning environment rather than the content that we're trying to teach them, right? And so
yeah.
it's so amazing to hear that. Obviously, again, like you said, you know, you're not going to force anybody to hug you. You're not going to force anybody to shake your hand. If they're not feeling it, they're not feeling it. But it's also really cool to see the progression of that to the end of the year, where everybody's just like, oh, this is a person that cares about me and that really wants to listen to me and watch me grow. And it's just such a cool thing to hear. I mean, what was your favorite part of teaching in the classroom?
Watching the growth, the maturing over the year. Kids who couldn't walk in the door without crying, to them helping new kids when they came in. Obviously the learning, but we're teaching them how to live in the world, to how to get along with that other person who doesn't want to get along with anybody today. And I just loved watching that. And I loved watching the transformation from beginning of the year to 9 months later. They're moving on to something else, and how much they've changed. I have one really quick story about that. I recently went back to my school. A couple times a year, I will volunteer to help on a special day that they have. So I'll take a day off from my job now and go there and spend the whole day. I haven't been gone long enough that my kids are all gone. I still have some children there that I had. And a little boy came to see me. He's in 5th grade. I was helping in the kindergarten wing. And I heard someone say, "Mrs. Flora?" And I turned around and he looked at me funny, because admittedly, I used to color my hair. My hair was short. Once I quit teaching, I was like, I'm going to change things up a little bit. And I just went natural. So he looked at me funny, like, "Mrs. Flora?" And I said, "Yeah." And I recognized him right away. Used to be a very difficult child in my kindergarten classroom, and very, very challenging. Sweet as could be. I said, "How's school going? How are you?" He gave me a hug, and he said, I'm good. I didn't expect to see you here today." And I said, "Are you in 5th grade?" He said, "I am." And I said, "Wow, how is that?" And he stepped back and he smiled at me and he said, "I don't throw chairs anymore." And I just had to laugh. I was just like blown away. And I said, that is a good thing. You have really grown and matured. And I'm so happy to hear that. But, we worked all year through some things like that. And he's not the only one. But the fact that he made an effort, he heard when he came in the building that I was there. And so he made his way all the way down an opposite wing of the school to find me. And then we had that interaction, and I smiled at him. I gave him a hug, and I said, "You keep it up. You are doing really well." But it's just funny. And he remembered the school was hard when you've not been to kindergarten and you have to figure out, wait a minute, what does she want me to do? I don't want to do that. That's a tough call and tough things to figure out. It takes a lot of patience to help them figure that out too. But that was just something that just recently happened to me, and it's sticking in my mind. It's like, No, you're not. You're doing really well now. So I'm really happy to hear that. So they grow.
What a beautiful thing, and it's one of the pieces I feel as though for most teachers is that piece of, wow, I'm going to miss that, right? Because especially for you, Michelle, having been in the same district for so long, I'm sure you had a lot of occurrences where students would come back and visit you. And, again, for any teachers that are listening that may be thinking of kind of taking a transition outside of the classroom, it's not all roses. There are some tough emotions behind it because, especially for any teacher, everything that you just mentioned, right? It's something that everybody misses fully. Even when I was on a motorcycle trip going through Latin America by myself, every single day I thought about my students, I thought about the classroom, I thought about all of these pieces. And so if it's something that anybody listening is feeling as though they need to make that transition, understand that, and we'll get into this later on, but it is something that you need to potentially explore for yourself. And it doesn't mean that it is always going to be easy. It doesn't mean that there are not going to be nostalgic moments where you're like, wow, do I go back? Everybody has these moments of, do I go back? And all these, the gamut of emotions that we experience as humans. And yet it's normal when we are kind of transitioning into something new, unknown, we may try to embark upon. Do you have like your best student turnaround story? I'm sure there's lots of them, just like the one you mentioned right now with the kindergarten student. But do you have another student turnaround story that really kind of comes to mind when I ask that?
In kindergarten, there's a lot. And I taught kindergarten first and second. The big turnarounds, I think, happen in kindergarten most often because you have kids who won't come in the door in the morning. And I don't want to be here. There's too many people. And they come in crying every day. And, that takes an emotional toll on you as well, trying to figure out, why is this happening? Is something happening in here that I'm not seeing, or what's going on? And what can I do to help? And I think that I just have several that come to mind right now of those kids that really, really struggled coming into school, getting into what we were supposed to do, working with other kids, and left the classroom and the end of the year ready for first grade or third grade and expressing themselves and able to share emotions and liking school and wanting to come every day. That's a huge, huge thing. And then, other turnarounds are those kids that are really struggling and that light bulb comes on, whether it be with communication or with just learning in general. But all of a sudden they get it and they're so excited and you're excited and you want to know, how far do I push without pushing too far? You don't want to push them back off that little edge that they're standing on. But just watching the amount of growth they can make and seeing them happy. I had a nonverbal student one time many years ago, and I had that student for 2 years. And when that student talked to me, that was amazing. It doesn't really matter what else we can get accomplished, but we broke a huge barrier here, and we're just going to go with it. And it may not happen again tomorrow, but we're going to take that win as a win and continue slowly inching forward to see if we can get more out of this. It's a balancing act all the time. You push too hard and they slip off that edge that you just pulled them up on. You don't push hard enough and they're like, why'd I do this? It is a balancing act constantly. And I think across the board, age-wise, it doesn't matter. You're just always walking that fine line, trying to figure out how much more can I push before I've pushed too hard, and how do I back off to give them a little break to catch their breath.
Yeah, I totally agree. That balance of it needing to, you have to push but not push too hard. And listen, as we all know, every student is at a specific part of learning in their lives, whether it's social, emotional, or content or otherwise. So those wins are wins no matter what. the one size fits all idea of everybody needs to be exactly at this point doesn't work, obviously, right? And so
Right.
having those moments of the progress and the growth, that's all that we can ask for, is by the end of the year each individual student has some specific type of growth or progress that we are proud of, that they are proud of, that is visible within them, right? And so that's
Yes.
super beautiful. And I agree in terms of, it totally makes sense that kindergarten is really kind of the first time they're going into something like this. And so there are countless turnaround stories because it's something that is so abruptly new at such a young age. And it takes a wonderful teacher like yourself to really take the time and patience to actually navigate that with each and every student. And like you said before, if a kid's having a bad day, you can kind of sit there and watch and ask them questions, and how can we work through this together? And let's talk about these things. How can we make your day a little bit better today from how it started off, right? And so all of these pieces, and listen, for any parents who've never taught before, you do that with your own children, one, two, three children, whatever, however many children you may have, and then you have a class of 25, and it's a lot. It's definitely a lot, but it's something that with passion is, yes, it can be taxing, it can be emotional, it can be stressful at times, but it's something that is clearly worth it. And I always tip my hat to elementary teachers because, in the middle school, I've mentioned this before in other podcasts, but even if my lesson was absolute garbage, even if I didn't do it the way I wanted to do it, and I just realized like this lesson just didn't work today, the students would always, every time they would leave the classroom saying thank you and understanding where I am as a person when it comes to something like that, right? Because we are, as teachers, we have to present that, and we have to present it potentially 5 times in a day. And so in the first trial of doing something like that, it may go south. And yet I give the credit to the elementary teachers for showing the students that, listen, those are human experiences that people are having. And by simply saying thank you, it's something that can really help somebody get through something like that. And just like you said about your open classrooms, is kind of looking over the cabinets and kind of seeing what's going on in the other class. And even just a smile from somebody else can help you really kind of move through a potential day that you might be having. So all around, this is so cool. And I want to get into the transition of, what it is that you're doing now. And one of the things I like to ask is, what was your least favorite part of teaching in the classroom?
Paperwork, all the records that had to be kept, data for the sake of data, not necessarily to feed something. I loved working with the kids and having the opportunity to teach. Honestly, as the years went on, there was more and more and more asked of the teachers, no extra time given, but more things that didn't allow me to do what I love doing, which was teaching and working with the kids. And so that was my least favorite part. There is data that has to be collected that I could tell you the answer to before I took the time to collect the data. Because of the things I'm doing daily with these children in the classroom, data has kind of taken over some things that it's not all necessary, especially when you're collecting the same type of data, but it's for 2 different people to look at in the building. And I was always pushing for that. Can't we make some kind of database where some of this goes in and I don't have to do this 5 times, or I don't have to enter this information in 5 different places? It just doesn't make sense, and it's a lot of time killer. So something has to go. There's only so many hours in a day. I had a family of my own. I had work outside of school just because of the nature of what we did. And so something has to give. Where's that at? Is it in your planning? Because I had to stay and do this, I don't have time to plan this. Is it in your home life? I always explained it to my administrator. I'm a vocal person, and if I don't agree with something, I will, in a nice way, tell you or explain to you my stance on why I don't think this is necessary or correct. Ultimately, I do what I'm told because that's my job. But I will express that, hey, let's think about this a minute. And I always express to my administrator, this is like your plate at Thanksgiving. Every time we come to a meeting, after you've been to a meeting with upper level admin, you're putting something else on my plate. But nobody's ever taking anything off. And if you go to Thanksgiving and everybody's brought this delicious food and you pile it on your plate and you get to the end and there's the gravy boat and you put it on, it pours all over the floor. That's what's happening. Something has to come off my plate if you want to put something else on, or lots of things are going to dump on the floor because we can't handle it. It's too much.
Yeah. I think that's something that will resonate with any teacher currently in the classroom, is that yes, every year there was more and more that had to be put on there. And I really like, your example here with the Thanksgiving dinner, because it's so true. I mean, when the cup is full, things are gonna start to overflow. Mm-hmm. And when more and more things are kind of put on there, it really, the inability to balance life and work properly and balance the different parts of your work properly, of the things that mattered for the students, which is ultimately the number one thing that matters the most.
Yes.
And, not being able to plan that lesson because you had some more paperwork that you had to give to 2-3 different people in different formats and all of these things. It's something that can really kind of throttle the passion of teaching. And it really kind of weighs down on everybody that's involved on the teaching side of things. And again, I don't necessarily judge any administrator, because they're in the same boat of having a boss as well.
Yes.
And it kind of just goes all the way up to the top, you know what I mean? But there's clear frustrations all the way through. And again, like you said, something has to give, something has to change. And the education space right now is being shaken up in such a way where there's new opportunities that may have been kind of blown off to the side as taboo potentially, like homeschooling, for example, or, all of these online schooling, all these different options. And yet public school is such an important option that really needs to be shaken up and revisited in some way. Because again, all this extra administrative work that teachers have is something that is just really kind of ruining the passion. And that's why the attrition rate is what it is today. Everybody is looking for something different. And again, I don't condone every single person leaving the classroom. If you are somebody who feels as though, you enjoy it and you can handle that and you can do things and you have some sort of balance in your life, then I highly encourage you stay, because we need you there. And yet on the same talking, any teachers who are feeling absolutely overwhelmed to the point that their body, their soul is telling them there needs to be something different here, then follow that and listen to these stories like Michelle's and understand that there are options outside the classroom, and you can pursue your passions in such a way that can also offer, balance to your life. And I think it's a perfect transition point for you to talk to us about the leap in general. I mean, how was the leap for you going from the classroom into something different?
Well, just to piggyback on what you were saying, all of the educators I know are very passionate people, and they're there for the children and to do the best for the children. So it's not that there's a lot of people there that don't want to be doing their job. It's just becoming too much. And it's becoming hard to balance. Do I do this or do I do that? Because doing both is not going to be an option. I don't have 24 hours a day to do this. And it became like that for me. It became where I loved my time. I was in my classroom with my kids, and not so much every time I had a meeting. It was frustrating because I came back with more things that had to be done. Some of which impacted the classroom. another kind of testing for my 5-year-olds, or another piece of data I had to collect, which meant that I couldn't do XYZ today because I had to meet with them individually or in small group to get this piece of data so I could turn it in. And so for me, gradually over the last several years, I like to put it this way. My philosophy of teaching and my knowledge from my education was not agreeing with what I was being asked to do anymore. And that puts me in a hard spot, ethically and philosophically. It just puts me in a bad spot. I wasn't being asked to do anything bad. I don't mean that. I just wasn't able to fulfill what I knew in my heart was what I needed to be doing with these children. And so when it got to that point, I was like, okay, I need to explore some other things. What else is there? While I was still teaching, I found out about a nonprofit in my state, in Indiana, called VIPS, or Visually Impaired Preschool Services. I'd never heard of it, didn't know it existed. I got connected through a friend, and I decided, I'm going to do the training for this. That year, it happened to fall on my between spring break and Thanksgiving. I could get in all the training and see where it leads. And I knew they had contractor positions. So it's early intervention. And as a contractor, you don't have a job. You say how many you want to work with. You pick those up. There are rules. You follow the rules. You file the papers. But you're not employed by anyone. You're your own business. And so once I was trained and I did hours and hours of following and shadowing some people who were doing it to make sure, do I really like this? Is this something I want to do? And I became more passionate about it. So I started picking up children on a contractor basis. So I would teach during the day, and then a few evenings a week, I would meet these children. When I first started, it was virtual because it was COVID. It's not designed to be virtual. It's supposed to be in person, but it was COVID. So what we do is we go in home doing early intervention, working with babies birth to 3 who are blind or low vision. It's really amazing. I found that I was getting what I needed out of teaching, or what I enjoyed the most, through this position. I was working with children. I was working with families one-on-one. I was in their home meeting their needs. Sometimes those needs were, I'm here to help you through a very difficult process because you just found out that your baby is blind. No one dreams that their child's going to be blind. What can I do to support you? Where can I get you some help? Let's work with your child. What can we do to help your child? And parents are very welcoming to you for that and very thankful to have the support, because oftentimes they are completely lost. Blindness and low vision in infants and babies typically does not come alone. They typically have lots of other health issues. The baby may have had a stroke, may have lost oxygen at some point, may have a genetic syndrome that's causing this, along with multiple other issues. And the families have a lot on their plate. And I thoroughly enjoyed going in their home, meeting them where they were at, asking them, what do you need from me? Or simply listening and figuring out on my own what they needed. If it was just me to work with the child, awesome. And let me teach you how to do this. Let me teach you how to help your child. Our service typically is once a month. So we go in, work with the family, show them some things to do, show them some things they can help with immediately. Like, for example, let's lay a black blanket or towel down and put your child's toys on that. So when they're doing tummy time, those colors pop out to them. And it's not blending into your carpet or mat you have on the floor. Just things like that you don't normally think about unless you get trained in this. But that makes a huge difference to that family, because from every day now until I come back in a month and they're working on that, that child might be able to see more and more of what's going on in front of them because of that, and maybe start interacting, whereas before it all blended together. So how can I help you? How can I help you help your child? And what advocacy do you need from me? I can help them get other services if they need that. I can make connections and say, hey, I can help them get connected for if there is deafness in there also, or physical needs. We are their advocate for school. So when they leave me at 3, the public school picks up with their early childhood program. However, these children need IEPs. So by me having a background in the classroom, I've sat through hundreds of IEP meetings in the course of my training and my teaching. So I can go with them. If you want me there, because they'll ask me a lot of questions, and I'll say, if you want me there, I can be there. If you just want me to support you and answer questions, I can do that. I can go to those meetings. I can advocate for them to get the testing that they need at the school and to get the service they need at the school. Sometimes they don't need any help because the school picks up really well and everything's in place. And then sometimes they do need an advocate to say, hey, what about this? We really need to look at this. We teach the parents how to be their child's best advocate. And I love seeing that. I love seeing the growth with these children. So I retired in May of 21, and I was doing as a contractor. I picked up more families as a contractor when I retired just to kind of help ends meet. And in October of 21, I was offered full-time at this position. And I absolutely love it. I still get my need to work with children and to watch them grow. But it's so much more because I feel like I'm helping the whole family in a lot of different ways. I work with older siblings. If they're in the house, I'll show them, hey, here's something you can do with your baby brother that might help his vision too. Or if a child's completely blind, I teach them ways to help the child use their other senses because they still have to explore the world. We want them to have the best experience in the world that they possibly can with what they have. And so, I've taught 4-year-olds how to play catch with their brother or sister that can't really move, but you know what? You can roll this ball up their tummy and back down and they can watch it. Or you can roll it across the floor and go get it. They can watch you. They can watch you play with your car in front of them. It's been a wonderful experience. Was it scary? Yes. But I think many teachers over my years have said, you'll know when it's time to step away from the classroom. And when you're younger, you're like, how am I going to know that? And like I said, when it came to the point that philosophically, things weren't quite meeting up with what I knew my kindergarten students needed, I knew that it was time for me to search for something else. But I've spent my whole career working with children, so the likelihood of me stepping completely away and doing something in a totally different field, it's there. If that's what your passion is and you want to switch, that's great. But for me, I've spent my whole life working with kids, so the likelihood of me doing something totally off the rails was not very high. I'm not a huge risk taker, so stepping away from the classroom was a big leap for me. But it was probably the best leap I've ever made. And I'm so, so thankful because it's opened up a lot of other things. I now live in a big city. I grew up in a very small town, lived there my entire life, and never dreamed I would move to a big city. And now I'm here and I'm experiencing so many things because I'm here, and I live next door to my daughter and my son-in-law and my grandson and another baby on the way and my other daughter and her son. It's just, I didn't have those opportunities either. So all of that together made the leap a very good thing for me. And I'm very thankful that I did it. My company is a nonprofit. So am I making what I was in the classroom? No, even though we discussed that teachers, given their education they need and all that, aren't paid that well, I'm not making what I was in the classroom. Because when you work for a nonprofit agency, that's just not possible. But I'm setting my own schedule. I have minimum hours to work, but I get to set my time in there when I set it up individually with my families and go see them. And I retired. I didn't just leave the classroom, I retired. So in my state, we have a pension, thankfully. And so I'm drawing my pension. So that fills the gaps and makes, the needs are covered. So I'm just very thankful for this position, and I'm thankful to learn about agencies I had no idea about. I didn't know there was an agency that worked with blind and low vision babies, and I'm learning about so many other agencies as well, all of whom, if you have an education background, they all help with those because the child development things, and it's just it worked out to be a great place for me to end up.
And I think that's one of the most beneficial things for me as well, is understanding all these different options and really kind of being a medium for other teachers to see the beautiful things that you have going on and what everybody else has going on. I mean, what an amazing story to tell, your story about the leap, about going from the classroom and onto something different. And for any teachers that are listening, Michelle just mentioned at the beginning of all of this that she was doing, part-time teaching and transitioning into something else as well. Just because you're going to take a leap doesn't mean that you have to completely jump. Although, sometimes that can be nice, but it's not necessary. You can stay in the classroom part-time while you're trying to figure something else out. Because listen, money is a thing, right? And also having this, the fear of, well, what if this doesn't work or that? By doing something potentially part-time in the classroom, you're allowing yourself to explore even more, and you're going to see the things that you really resonate towards. And I really love what you said, that the older teachers had mentioned that, you will know when it is that you're ready to leave. And I think that's with everything in life. And it's so funny because when you're in those moments, you really doubt that inner part of you that will kind of let you know when it's time for anything in life, right? And when it happens, you're like, oh, that was so clear. I don't know why I ever doubted that. And so for any teachers listening to that piece as well, it's true. I feel the same exact way. And listen, I felt that in 2018, finished out the school year into June of 2019, and thankfully I listened because there was a part of me that said, what if I just do one more year? And if I had done one more year, it would have been during COVID, and it would have just changed a lot of things for me. I wouldn't have been able to fulfill the dream of traveling on a motorcycle and doing all of those things. And so really kind of listening to your gut and understanding that it is there for a reason. And again, I mean, this job that you have now with this nonprofit, Michelle, is just such an amazing thing to hear about. And it was something when I heard on the first initial phone call with you, I was completely blown away. And I got chills while you were mentioning all of these things because it is just such a nice thing. What a service to offer, not only for that one child, but for the families as a whole. I think the majority of families do not understand the options that exist out there for whatever may be going on with their student, even if everything is good and you just don't understand the different options and possibilities. There's so much out there. And for you to be a valuable resource from somebody who was in the classroom and saw the growth and all of the different pedagogy that went into teaching students, and you're applying that into what you're doing now with this nonprofit. And I really love what you were talking about with the older siblings, saying like, hey, here's some things you can do to actually help your younger brother or your younger sister. And every single thing is just so heartwarming, all of these things that you have mentioned. And it's just so cool to listen to. And it's just, again, for teachers listening, your resume does not end in the classroom. You have been trained to do so much in this life. And when we realize that as individuals and we say to ourselves, all right, yes, of course, maybe the resume will have to look a little different, but if you were to take a piece of paper right now, write down all of the things that you do within the classroom, you are a significant candidate for the majority of positions on this earth today because you've already done some portion of that job in the classroom. And yet, for the teachers who don't want to leave education, just as Michelle and just like myself, and just like thousands of other teachers, it's not necessary. You don't have to leave education as a whole. You know, you can do these things. You can apply your passion for education and children into a different setting, a different environment, and really kind of let that passion shine through and again, kind of build this sense of self again and allow yourself to really kind of shine with what it is that you want to do by creating your own schedule and being a contractor and all of these amazing things that Michelle has mentioned today. And again, you know, I was really looking forward to this podcast, and it's amazing. Everything that I'm hearing and all the listeners are hearing right now. It's just such cool stuff that you have going on, and I'm sure it's extremely rewarding. And Michelle, tell me, you know, how has this transition helped your relationships with the people around you, but more importantly, yourself?
When I left the classroom, for me, it had become a very, very stressful place. And in the state I'm in, new things are being implemented from the government down. I'll just say people who are not familiar with education or the classroom are making rules that they don't understand the impact of. And for me, I was always struggling with, what do I do now? How I don't have time to get this done. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist as well with my work. And so not getting everything done caused stress for me. Going to another meeting caused stress for me. Stress impacts your body in physical ways. I do have arthritis, and it impacted me in a big way. In that you don't realize how sick you can get from stress. And so for me, I knew all those things added together told me you'd have to do something different now. And for me, I feel better, first of all. I'm not under that kind of stress anymore. And everybody around me knows that I'm happier, and it's easier to do things, plan things out, because I set my schedule and I can say, you know, if I had to leave the classroom, I had to come up with sub-plans. And at my school, that meant pages and pages of things typed up. You can't just take a day off. And if you took too many of the days they gave you, they wanted to know why. And so all of that just adds up to it's time to do something else. And so I don't have that anymore. Yes, there's requirements where I'm working. There's paperwork that has to be done. But every time they give me something else, they're like, oh, we're really sorry that we have to do that. I'm like, this is nothing. Don't worry. This is nothing. This is not even comparable to what I was struggling with before. And when they say it's a report, I envision these long narrative report cards. And then when I find out it's just a one-page thing, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll get that done. I'll give it to you tomorrow. That's not a big deal. So it's just, I'm coming at this job where it may be very stressful for someone who hasn't done what I did before. For me, when I come in, this is like a breath of fresh air. And I love working with the families and the age group that I work with. So overall, that makes me a happier person, a healthier person, and just the less stress affects everything about your life. And I don't think, I see some of my friends still teaching, and I don't know that they realize how much of an impact the stress is having on them physically and mentally and just their overall health. And so you have to listen to your body, because those things happen for a reason. And so for me, it built up over time, and it was like, okay, the body is telling me something, and I need to figure out a way to listen to it and ease some things up to make it better.
That piece of the how stress can affect you physically. I mean, if you think of going, everybody going on to April vacations or all the vacations from school and all the teachers getting sick because you're really trying to hold yourself together
Yes.
because you're like, I don't really have a choice right now. We're just going to keep this going. And the second you're allowed to relax, your body gets sick. And, and to your point of doing the substitute plans, I mean, we talk about this on every podcast with whoever's here is that this idea that you have to take some time off and you cannot focus on what it is that you're taking that time off for because you have to create these subplans. And then all day long, you're thinking, what is this? Are my students being good to the substitute? Is my substitute a good fit for my students? Is what this substitute is doing, is that going to affect what my plans were for the rest of the week? There's so many of these things that are just spinning in our heads when we're doing this. And talk about a stressful way to go try to figure something else out in your life. And I do agree. I feel as though a lot of people who are teaching right now may not understand how much that stress is affecting them and how much it's affecting their relationships around them. And again, most importantly, the relationships they have with themselves. This stress is something that when you step away from it, and like you said, everything is lighter, everything is nicer. You're making your own schedule. You can actually plan a work-life balance with the important things that matter to you and your family in those moments because you can schedule things around them. All of these pieces are just pointing to the benefits of a potentially stressful and anxiety-inducing leap that ultimately is worth all of that, right? Because you are, again, and especially with what you're doing right now, you are able to take your passion and you're able to amplify it to the students and the families that you're working with because you're not being bombarded by all this extra administrative necessities within the classroom. And it's funny how you say, they're asking for reports and you're thinking of these big things that you have to create and they're just like, oh no, this is just one page. And you're like, whew, thank you. I'll get this done for you immediately. This is not bad. This is nothing compared to what I have dealt with in the past,
Right.
So yeah, thank you. This is incredible. I mean, is there anything else about your journey that you would like to add that I didn't necessarily ask you?
I've met many incredible people along the way. I feel like I've grown a lot as a person through all my years of teaching. Every child I had has affected my life, every parent that I've interacted with. And I just really encourage my peers to listen to their body, listen to their mind, and also to speak up when something isn't right or they're asking you to do something one more time to take away from those kids in the classroom. Speak up. There was a point when I left, there were a few people who was like, who's going to say it out loud? Because I just was that person. And when I was at a point where I'm like, I know I'm going to be leaving soon because I read the writing on the wall and I just know I'm listening to my body. This is time. When things didn't sit right with me, I just said, say it in a professional way. I never was condescending or anything like that, but I would say, hey, can you explain to me why I'm doing this? What is the purpose of this? And that's the whole thing. Why are we here? We're here for the kids. We're here to make a difference in their lives. We're here to help them improve. And we need to keep that forefront in everything we do. And that's why I'm doing what I do now. I'm here for the kids. I'm here for the families. Do you have a question I can answer for you? I ask them when I go in, what do you want me to work on today? I have in my mind, I know what the child needs to do, but did something else happen in between that I can be more of a help to them? Still regarding to my job, but is there something particular you want your child to be able to do that I can help you with that involves their sight and their other senses. Let me figure out a way to do that. Let me go ask someone else. Don't be afraid to say, I'm not really sure about that. I'm going to have to check with somebody else, or I'm going to bring somebody else in to help me. There's no fault in that. And for my friends in the classroom, the same way. If you don't have the answer, ask somebody, ask them to help you. But remember your why of why you're there and what your passion is, and listen to your mind and your body.
As much as I would like to add to that, I think that is really the perfect part to kind of wrap this up. I mean, again, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your expertise, for showing people that there is another option out there that they may not have known of before. And yeah, I mean, the amazing work that you're doing is impacting families and children in a very significant way. And I think it's really noteworthy to mention that, because I mean, these stories are just incredible. The what you are accomplishing with these families is something that helps them for the rest of their lives. It helps them alleviate stress. It helps them when they know that somebody is an advocate for them going into another transition into the school systems and dealing with IEPs that they don't even understand. And all of these pieces that you're doing, Michelle, are making a serious impact on these families that you're working with. And your story today has undoubtedly helped many teachers understand the ability to transition into something new and what the benefits are from it. And so thank you so much for all of this. Really, truthfully, this has been an unbelievable podcast. And is there anywhere that people can find you, or any way that you'd like people to potentially reach out if they may have questions about anything?
Sure. I can give you my email. I'm going to give you, it's Flora, Flora, at live.com. And feel free to email and ask questions. I might not have the answer, but I can maybe direct you in a way that will lead you to someone who has the answer, or I might be able to find the answer for you. So it's been a very positive thing. Peter, thank you for doing a podcast like this, because I spent many years Googling, what else can I do with a teaching degree? Because we get put in a slot and people think there's nothing else you can do. But we also make great managers, because we have to manage so many things on our plate every day. There's just a lot of potential there. Just because your degree says education doesn't mean that you're stuck in a slot. It allows you to do many, many different things.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So well said. And I appreciate the kind words. And for anybody listening, if you know anybody that is kind of struggling with the things that we're talking about within the classroom, or anyone that you feel may benefit from this podcast, please, like, subscribe, and share this to anybody you may know. The more people this reaches, the more benefit this has for people who may be struggling in their lives with something specific, and these could be the answer to their prayers. So definitely share this whenever possible. Michelle, Flora, thank you so much. This was unbelievable. I really look forward to keeping in touch, and
Yes, please.
and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Peter. You too.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.